So, Lone Rider here, and in addition to being a cyclist and a novice archer, I'm also somebody who has an interest in historical arms and armor. Um, Mostly edged weapons, it must be said, but nevertheless. So, after I ran into a handful of Revolutionary War reenactors at the Memorial Day parade, I talked to them yesterday about some of their gear, and I thought it was pretty cool. So I was curious, what that entailed and that sort of thing. So I started doing some Google searches. And I very quickly realized that this is ridiculous, but here in the People's Republic of New Jersey, flintlock weapons are regulated the same way as modern firearms. I know, right? I mean, it's kind of silly. You've got all these gun control advocates that are always saying, well, the Second Amendment was only meant for muskets. Now, in and of itself, that's kind of idiotic. It assumes the founders of this country were morons who had no idea of technological advancement and couldn't conceive of it. It's also not applied consistently. I mean, if you were going to say that the Second Amendment of the Bill of Rights was only intended to apply to technology that existed in the 18th century, then you'd also have to say that the First Amendment functions the same way, which would mean that freedom of speech, for example, doesn't apply to the internet, radio, TV, basically anything that didn't exist in the 18th century, which is stupid, which is why they don't do it. But for some reason, they don't think it's stupid when they use that argument about guns. Anyway, um, I guess it's all a question of whose ox is being gored, as the old saying goes. But it is kind of funny that the same people who are always throwing out, well, the Second Amendment was only meant to apply to muskets, even if you get past all the absurdities of that in and of itself, you then have the hypocrisy that when you're actually dealing with flintlock weapons, i.e. muskets, or 18th century technology, i.e. technology from the 1700s, so over 200 years ago, they want to regulate them like modern firearms. So on one hand, they're like, well, these new gun laws are really only about restricting modern firearms. We don't want to infringe on your Bill of Rights. That just applies only to the old stuff. But then when you actually are talking about the old stuff, either full-on original antiques or modern reproductions, but that function in the same way as the originals, in places like New Jersey, they're regulated the same way as other firearms in many cases. And one of the things I came across when I was looking up reenactor stuff, just to see what these guys did and what it was all about, was a warning on various reenactor websites and message boards where they were saying, if you're going through New Jersey, be very careful because people have been arrested for having, flintlock reproduction muskets. And as far as flintlock pistols are concerned, which were sometimes carried by officers and other people of the period, they're treated like modern handguns in the People's Republic of New Jersey, as they call it. Now, what does that mean? If you're in the state of New Jersey and you're at a reenactment and you're carrying, a flintlock pistol as a sidearm, as part of your reenactment accoutrements, you need a modern handgun permit to have that tucked in your belt or your sash or however it is you're carrying it. Yeah, a modern carry permit for a reenactment device that's just firing a charge and no ball. So it's not even loaded in the functional sense. But you need the same carry permit you would for a Glock 19. And there actually was a history professor who was arrested, or a history teacher, who collected antiques from the colonial period, and he had a original flintlock that was, not loaded, probably didn't even work, from the 1700s. And he had it in his car. I don't know if he had just bought it like at an estate sale or if he was just transporting it somewhere after showing it to somebody, whatever. But he had this old antique, it wasn't a functional weapon, in his car. And he got pulled over by the police. And they arrested him. They charged him with, having an unlicensed handgun or something. Now, when you and I hear that, we usually think of somebody who's got, like a Glock in the glove box or, a 38 stashed under the seat. This was an antique. So I just wanted to throw that out there. When you hear gun control people, and the irony is it's usually people in places like New Jersey or New York or other places that already have really strict laws. When you hear them talk about, oh, woe is me, anybody can just walk into like a Walmart and buy an Uzi, so the laws need to be stricter. remember how strict they actually are. They're so strict that a guy got arrested for a non-functioning antique flintlock. Yeah. I mean, how much stricter can the laws be? I mean, the only way to maybe make it stricter is to have, have to get a permit for an airsoft gun. You know, I can't think of how you could make the gun laws in places like New Jersey and New York any stricter without just full on prohibiting anything that even looks like a gun. It's against the law to draw a picture of a gun, something like that. That's the only way I could think to make it any stricter, because it's really strict already in these places. It's too strict, and I'm not saying there shouldn't be some rules for, let's say, the public carry of weapons. That makes sense. I don't think there should be restrictions, generally speaking, on ownership, because keeping something in your house doesn't hurt anybody. But I'm not saying it should be full on anarchy and everybody should be able to have everything. However, saying that, well, oh, we might need some regulation to, for example, control what a person does, let's say, in a public place where there's other people around who might get hurt. Okay, that makes sense. I totally understand why people don't want somebody, let's say, shooting off their Glock on their porch if they live in, an urban area and there's people all around. I get that. Or going into the town square or the subway or something and shooting it off. I get that, because there's other people around who might get hurt. However, we're not talking about that sort of thing when we're talking about gun control. We're not talking about just common sense regulations about what somebody may or may not do in public or in other situations where there's other people around who might get hurt. Because in that case, what you're talking about is regulating action, not possession of an item. Gun control isn't about regulating human action. It's about regulating what people can and can't even own or keep in their house. And that, I think, is the problem. We've gotten to the point now where the laws are so strict that anything that even looks like a gun, even a non-functioning antique, I mean, okay, yes, it is a gun, or it was when it was manufactured over 200 years ago, but nobody's going to be shooting it off today or next week. And as far as, somebody who might own a flintlock or something, when was the last time anybody was killed with a flintlock in anger? Like the battle of, some battle of the Revolutionary War. I mean, I can't think of a modern instance of that happening. Could a flintlock be used to hurt somebody? Well, yeah, I mean, so could a sword. But, generally speaking, they aren't. So I don't understand why black powder, either reproduction or antique weapons, are regulated in this manner. Then again, I also don't understand why New Jersey treats BB guns as firearms. Again, I understand you might want to have some regulation. Maybe somebody has to show they're, let's say, over 18 to buy it. But why a firearms license when it's not a firearm? There's no gunpowder, there's no combustion, there's no ignition, there's no fire involved. It's not a firearm by definition. But legally in New Jersey it is. That's how whacked our laws are. So it's not just black powder muzzle-loading muskets that are regulated like a Glock 19. It's a BB gun that's also regulated like a Glock 19. And the same people who've imposed those regulations and who enforce them, not against gangbangers or would-be mass murderers or people who want to go on a rampage or something. Who do they enforce them against? A 70-year-old history teacher who has an antique curio in his car. Like, seriously? No, not cool. So the gun laws, not only should they not be stricter, they're already too strict, at least in places like this. And I think that's what we have to remember. The media and all the gun control advocates in places like New Jersey, New York, places like that, the message they're sounding to the public is that the gun laws are lax and need to be stricter. But if you look at who their audience is, at least the audience in their immediate vicinity, those people are living under some of the strictest gun laws around. Yet maybe if you go out to like Montana or something, the laws aren't so bad. Most people who buy a regional New Jersey newspaper or who turn into, a channel that's broadcast from, let's say, New York or something, their audience isn't in Montana. Their audience doesn't live under those more reasonable laws. Their audience lives under strict, draconian, stupid, insidious laws. I mean, gun control, people were sold a bill of goods. They were told the laws need to be stricter when they're already so fracking strict that they're sending, history professors to jail for antiques. Really. Yeah. And they're posting warnings on reenactor message boards saying if you're driving with your reproduction musket and all your reenactor gear through New Jersey, be careful because you might be arrested. Why? Anybody can tell, one, it's not a likely weapon of crime, being an antique musket or a reproduction. And two, you're clearly going to a reenactment. I mean, not only is somebody robbing a 7-Eleven with a musket unlikely, but doing it in full colonial regalia, yeah. I mean, not for nothing, but how many bandits walk into a place wearing a tricorn hat? Absurd. And so, once again, gun control is ridiculous. And the people who want more gun control are even more ridiculous. They're constantly saying the laws need to be stricter, the laws need to be stricter. They have no idea how strict the laws are. And this is where I come back to, somebody hates guns, they're not going to know a lot about guns. I get that because it's not their thing. Then I wonder if they're an intelligent, functional adult, why they don't realize, since I'm coming from a position of ignorance, why don't I learn something first before I try to tell other people what to do or weigh in on the subject? Duh. But secondly, why don't they at least know about the laws, right? I mean, if I was a gun control advocate, I could say to myself, gun control advocate, you may not like guns or not, and therefore may not know anything about them, but you do have an interest in laws relating to guns, so why don't you know something about that? They know. Or they're being disingenuous. And I got to wonder how much of it is them being disingenuous when they tell people in states like New York and New Jersey that have a long-standing policy of over-the-top, absurdly strict gun laws, that the laws need to be stricter because, oh my God, anybody can just walk into a store and buy an Uzi. Yeah, how does that work? How does somebody just walk into a store and buy a military-style assault rifle in a place where you need a firearms permit for a BB gun and where they're arresting people for flintlock muzzle loaders? How does it work that somebody could walk into a store and buy an M16? Well, guess what? It doesn't. All right. First of all, that assault rifle they're talking about is actually a civilian semi-automatic rifle that just happens to look a little bit like some of the military ones. It's not fully automatic. It's not an assault rifle. But, okay, even there. How could you claim that the laws for any modern firearm are too lax when they're arresting people for flintlocks? And when you need to get a gun license for something that's not even a gun, namely, a BB gun, you need a firearms license, but it's not a firearm. Amazing, amazing. And then there's the fact that this ruins people's lives. People get sent to jail. People get deterred from pursuing their interests and hobbies. People get their, tangled in the legal system, might get their property confiscated, might go to prison, certainly get arrested, that sort of thing. People think that they just pass a law and forget about it and that's it. Maybe they forget about it. The people who've been subject to that law don't, because what happens is it gets enforced against people. But whenever you pass a law against something, you have to be cognizant of the fact that what you're doing is setting events in motion that could lead people to get arrested, charged, prosecuted, and convicted and sent to prison. So, what the gun control advocates who often make a show of saying, oh, well, what if it saves one life? Ask yourself, how many lives is it going to ruin? How many people who haven't hurt anybody, like that 70-year-old history teacher, are going to get arrested and sent to jail because, what, they got some antique thing in their car that's not going to hurt anybody? No. Look, I get there's some people out there who don't like guns. Guess what? I don't like golf. But on the other hand, I don't make a habit out of going around talking about how golfers are evil and they should be banned. So, if you don't like guns, that's great. Don't have anything to do with them. But to sit here and try and convince us that our laws are lax and we need stricter laws when, again, they're arresting people for antique, non-functional flintlocks. Something's not right in Denmark here, as the Bard said. And so just keep that in mind whenever you hear gun control advocates running around talking about how the laws need to be stricter. Keep in mind how strict they are in certain places like New Jersey, New York, where oddly enough the the ideology of those people already holds sway. You know, people forget gun control is a political orthodoxy, and certainly among many politicians and among many in the media, it's the viewpoint that's the established viewpoint. So if you look at places where these people themselves hold the most sway and where their ideology does, what you find is that, well, the gun laws are already pretty much in line with what they're advocating. Oddly enough, a lot of those places also have big cities that usually also have a lot of crime. So I don't know, how's the gun control working? But whether or not it deters the criminals, and that's a whole other subject. I mean, look at Chicago, for example. Really strict gun laws. Over the weekend, I think they shot like 20 more people or something. Um, I'm not trying to be flippant. I mean, it's tragic, but it just goes to show you how effective gun control is. I mean, seriously. But whether or not gun control is effective at curtailing, let's say, gangbangers, what do we know is it's going to infringe on the law abiding. I'm pretty sure that history teacher who got sent to jail wasn't a member of some gang. I'm pretty sure he wasn't on the way to do a crime.